Talk one step closer to a playoff berth and potentially a 6th seed in the AFC playoff berth. Plenty of football ahead. Luke Jones and I will be discussing this and more. And Luke, we've talked a lot about the offense. We talked a lot about the defense, and we're going to talk about the special teams in a minute. But I do want to address this, and it's going to be a meandering topic, I think, for me all week. As you know, I usually only write about things when I have an incredible passion for it these days. It is my first love, but it also is time-intensive, and you do a lot of writing at WNST.net. But I don't know how I'm going to get around writing about the obvious, the absolute obvious, the purple elephant in the room, which is the 25,000 empty seats at the game on Thursday night. It is now not just a trend. I think it's becoming a way of life for people to not use their tickets. The tickets were as little as $5 or $10 outside. They were $20 on StubHub. I'm accustomed to seeing this in Cleveland every year, where tickets are already $6 for the game that you and I may be enjoying in a couple weeks before Christmas. But this malaise for the NFL, this malaise for the Ravens, this anger at the Ravens from folks, and I know the Orange Man's already started tweeting on Tuesday morning. He's clearly trying to damage the league as he's trying to damage our country. But that's another story altogether. But there are 25,000 people who didn't show up for the game on Monday night. And this is a Sunday, Monday, Thursday night thing. People don't like coming to night games, but I think this is something that needs to be talked about, bro, by everybody, because not just me having an investment in sports my whole life in Baltimore, but the community having an investment. And you're not old enough, but I am, and I know your dad told you about it a million times with you on his knee about the day we lost the Colts. And it's disturbing and emotional to me. I'll just let you have at it, because I'm going to be having at it a lot of 50 Ways from Sunday between now and the time Matt Stafford gets here.
It's definitely eyebrow raising, and again, let's go back. This isn't something that just happened overnight either. I think you can go back to 2014, 2015, 2016, and certainly not 25,000 no-shows or anything like that. And I don't know what the exact number is. I didn't major in crowd estimates. Get asked that every time I'm at an Orioles game, whether it's a good crowd or a bad crowd. I don't know. I can tell you when it's better or when it's not so good. Monday night, needless to say, was not so good, but you go back to 2014 and 15 and 16, you saw a few more empty seats. You saw some more no-shows, and it's something that I think has just become gradual. I think there are a lot of reasons for it. Full disclosure, I don't pay to attend Ravens games, so right off the bat, I don't want to be the one to tell people how to spend their money.
By the way, I do, just as an aside. I buy two tickets, and I've always bought 2 tickets, and I sit in my seats, and, it's $85 a throw for me, too. So, fair disclosure.
And I will say this, before I started covering the team full-time for WNST.net, I did have season tickets from 2006 to 2010. Now, did not have PSLs, ordered them off eBay, but I was a college kid who didn't have a whole lot of money, and my number one ticket disposable income was Ravens season tickets with my good buddy who we went to every game. So that aside, I think you just look at this. There are a lot of reasons. I think a lot of the reasons are universal to the league. I think it's universal to the idea that what do you and I talk about every time we have a chance to sit down and watch NFL Sunday Ticket or NFL Red Zone? Most Sundays we say, not a very good product. So I think there are a lot of issues like that. I think there are a lot of people who just assume watch it on HD TV and stay at home. And I think if people want to do that, that's their right. So there's a lot of that going on around the league. But that said, here specific to Baltimore, I think you do look at a team that has been pretty mediocre now for going on 5 years. But everybody doesn't get to be the Patriots or the Steelers.
That's part of signing up for being a sports fan. You don't want them to be Maryland football, which is irrelevant, right? Like never really having a chance. I don't know. I don't know that a fan base has had it much better than we've had it here over, pick any period, Luke, the last 10 years, the last 20 years, right? Any measurement you would have in modern football. And look, the Saints have won championships, the Buccaneers have won championships. There have been plenty of places where they've won, and other places like Detroit and Kansas City, and other places like Cleveland where they just can't get out of their way, right? But we've had it good. I don't think from what's been on the field. Now, you can talk about Terrell Suggs in bleach and Ray Rice punching his girlfriend in a glass elevator like a moron. Jamal Lewis going to jail, Ray Lewis going to jail. You can talk about anything you want on that, ticket prices, all of that, but I don't think you can bitch about the football, man. I mean, that's where I would say it's been the most stable franchise, trying to be a classy franchise. I don't know, that's all in the eye of the beholder for how many arrests you have and what your tolerance level for that is across society, I would say at this point. But on the field, dude, I don't think anybody from Steve Bisciotti down to, the equipment manager should ever apologize for the football team on the field since the team got here. That's my opinion on it. I think we have been spoiled by they've been a far above the bar franchise for all of their existence. So I can't hear that. And I will hear that it's boring right now. I'll hear that. But right. I don't think there could be any long range the Ravens have let me. You want to be let down. How about going across the parking lot to this creep that's owned the baseball team for 25 years?
Okay, wait
that would be, over the body of work. There's a reason the baseball ballpark's empty. And the football ballpark, I would say, all right, if it's empty because people don't want to buy the tickets, I'll hear that. The tickets are sold. That's the weird part for me, is that they're paid for and people aren't using them. That's the real incredible head-scratcher for me, that someone wrote a check and that they just sat in the desk, 25,000 of them on a Monday night. That's all.
But you're just telling me that the baseball team's bad and that's why no one goes. The baseball team's won way more over the last 4 to 5 years, which I think is what most fans, because we are talking about an instant gratification society, we're all about what have you done for me lately.
Sure.
And if you go back far enough with the timeline, absolutely. The Ravens fan base has been spoiled. If you go back 2 decades, if you go back 4 years, well, they're below 500 over the last 4 to 5 years. So, I hear what you're saying on that, and I don't even disagree. But at the same time, I don't think we can look at this and then look at the Orioles and say, well, I understand why people don't go. Well, I'm not so sure about that. The Orioles did make the playoffs 3 times in the last 6 years. The Ravens have made it once in the last 4 years. I think there's some parallels here. And I'm not talking about ownership. I'm not talking about long-term. I'm talking here recently as far as product on the field. I think there's something to be said that people just aren't going to games. And some of the reasons that we talked about with the Orioles, that we thought it was all about, well, they're not marketing themselves well, and this and that, and they took away bargain night. All those things are true, and all those things apply. But we also said what? This has been a winning team, and people haven't really embraced it. Well, we're seeing now a team that built up a whole lot more equity, that a team that had been far more successful for a long period of time. They're not getting the same kind of enthusiasm and support in that way. So, how much of it's just, maybe Baltimore's not as great of a sports town as we thought. I think there's something to be said about that, specific to that. But I want to go back to something you did mention, and I think this is something that's worth noting. I think you do go back to the Ray Rice incident and how poorly this organization handled that. I think you do go to the Colin Kaepernick thing and how poorly this organization handled that when you have your owner saying, pray for us. Really? About Colin Kaepernick, you're going to take that kind of an approach publicly when you've had players that have been convicted of crimes, served prison sentence. Jamal Lewis went to jail. There are a lot of things that I don't think they've handled well. And do I think that's the main reason they've had 20,000 no-shows on Monday night? No, but I think all of these things add up, and it hasn't been a very good product. And we talked about this in our post-game discussion. This is probably the worst offense in the history of the franchise. And go back to 2000. Their passing game ranked, I think, 21st or 22nd. This team is dead last in the NFL in passing offense, and the passing game is kind of like home runs in baseball. It's what attracts people. And I know this is a defense-minded town, but this isn't a defense led by Ray Lewis and Ed Reed, and that's something that matters from an appeal standpoint. Look, I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying that that's fair, but I do think these factors are real. I know it from talking to some of my friends who just, they tell me week after week, They flat out say, Luke, I don't know how you watch this team every week. I'm bored to tears watching them every single week. And I think that's what is explaining a lot of the short term. So I think there are a lot of factors at work here, some of them universal around the league that, okay, maybe you look at what we saw at Green Bay last week, and that's more the exception and not the norm around the league. The fact is the Ravens have been very mediocre for the last 5 years. I mean, even this year, they're 6-5, but certainly they haven't exactly had a gauntlet of a schedule that they've had to go through. So I think there are a lot of people who they're not as intrigued. There's been some PR missteps. I think we'd be amiss if we didn't acknowledge the unrest from a couple years ago. And if you just follow Facebook on a daily basis, people living in Baltimore, people are not wanting to go downtown. People in the harbor getting mugged, people in Fed Hill getting mugged. I mean, areas that are considered nicer parts of the city. And I think there's some of that, especially for night games. So I'm not saying that's valid. I'm not saying that's a legitimate, that people are right to think that. But I do think it's part of the equation, and I think this is a very complex issue. I think there are a lot of layers to it. I don't think it's one thing. I think it's a number of things kind of plaguing what we're seeing now in terms of attendance, not just for the Ravens, but I think a lot of these issues apply for the Orioles as well.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. This portion of our WNST programming brought to you by DNL Window Tinting. 26 years, just like our radio show, of tinting everything. Cars, boats, businesses. They put the shades on the sun. They take the squint away. They're in Parkville and in White Marsh. You can find them online at DNL Window Tinting. Also, shout out to Deli-ish over on Wise Avenue in Dundalk. The holiday season is here. You need to cater in. Go to DeliBaltimore.com and order up those tasty Reubens, the corned beef, and the legit sandwiches like the Curly Fryer. It is Deli-ish on Wise Avenue in Dundalk. Tasty pickles, and they also cater for the holidays at DeliBaltimore.com. Luke is with us here. Let's get back onto the field. And look, I was literally taking notes for fleshing out something that will feel like a document in regard to the sadness, profound sadness I have about watching the deterioration of passion for not just the sports team, but really for our community and our city. I mean, what you just said, living up in in Shrewsbury, up in Pennsylvania, and you spend 100 nights a year in the city, maybe more than that. I mean, you come down here for 60 or 70 Orioles games. You're down here, a dozen times for football games and practices. So, I mean, you drive in and out, and you see there's a lot of people. It's very sad to me to see people say they're not coming to the city, they're not going to come back to. I don't know at what point it turns. I mean, like it did in a place like New York where it got cleaned up, and in a lot of places it get cleaned up. But there is a correlation between sports and community that I've always held near and dear, which is why I did the walkout on Peter Angelos in 2006, because the city was empty for baseball games night after night after night, April, May, June, July, August, and that wasn't what these stadiums were designed to do, right? I mean, these stadiums were designed to be beacons of light for people to come to and share and drop dough in Federal Hill and spend money at the harbor and spend the night at a hotel and discover a restaurant and make a friendship over a tailgate. I feel that part of it slipping away. And, I want to give it a big hug or be the catcher in the rye, but all I can do is opine on it, having been, if I'm not an expert on this, I don't know who is, with a vested life in this here. I think people need to be talking about this as much as they're talking about the mayor and talking about crime, because all of it is reflected, but then we get a Monday Night Football game here and the place is empty. That certainly isn't a good postcard for tourism for what this was supposed to be about to begin with, right?
I think that's fair, and I don't get me wrong, I don't like seeing it. It's the same. I don't like seeing the Orioles in September when they're in the middle of a pennant race, as they were most of the last 6 seasons, last year kind of being the exception, or this past year being the exception. I don't like seeing an empty ballpark. I don't like seeing an empty stadium. But, some of the issues that you mentioned as far as crime, as far as people not wanting to come downtown, I do think as we continue to get deeper and deeper into the social media era, I think we have lost our sense of community in the standpoint of having more value to tailgate, having more value to go to games. We're all wrapped up into fantasy football. I know you're not, but most of us are. I think, and again, I think technology is a big part of this too. I mean, I can sit there, as I did on Sunday because the Ravens didn't play a game, and I can, if I have NFL Sunday Ticket, great, but if I have just NFL Red Zone, I can sit there and monitor every single game in the NFL. And when you're talking about a product not being all that great, as we tend to talk about week after week after week, and I don't mean the Ravens specifically, I mean the NFL, then it's easier to consume that when you have more choices and you're flipping to a team about to score a touchdown rather than seeing the Ravens go 3 and out for the 4th time in 5 drives. And look, again, I'm not saying that this makes it right. I'm not saying that I agree with all of these notions, but I think that's the climate we're living in 2017. And
dude, this might be a 5-part series. I mean, I'm just going, I'm writing down everything we're talking about right now, and it's so thick that there is no 18-inch newspaper column to even begin to address this. I mean, this is a thick thing for a guy that owns a sports radio station. I think if I opened up phone lines, I'd sit here and take phone calls, 500 different phone calls with 500 different views on this, depending on where you are. And the one thing you haven't even mentioned, and I haven't mentioned, it's really freaking expensive, right?
Yeah.
Like all the way around. I mean, I blew $200 on Monday night freezing my ass off in the upper deck in the front row, and if I had to pull out, fresh $1 bills and count out 190 of them, like I would if I went to a nice dinner somewhere or whatever, I've never had a $190 dinner in my life, literally. Like I just don't eat that much food. I guess I've had a $190 hotel room and a $190 flight, but it's $190 for me and my wife to go. We don't have like the premium seats in the club box, and I'm not, tossing back 3 beers at $9 a piece either. So, and I'm also not getting hammered in the parking lot anymore, and I'm also almost 50 years old. So, and I've been doing this for 22 years. So, there is a little bit of monotony to it, but then there's also the pricing part of it. But those tickets were paid for, to my point. You know what I mean? Then we go back to, the place is empty. I mean, it really is quite the pretzel here, right? There's a lot of things going on around race, the presidency, politics, football, boredom, the Ravens, community, crime, riots, price, value, the red zone. I mean, this is a lot thicker than I thought it was, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you tried to, like you just said, if you just had a 1,200-word column, and you know how it would be the fans need to support this football team, and it would basically be a plea of telling people how to spend their money. This is a complex issue, and by the way, I know it's an issue that Dick Cass and the organization, and when I say issue, I mean an issue that has 30 different prongs to it. That we're talking about here. We could probably make a list of 30 different items that would apply to some degree or another. But this is something that I'm sure they're more concerned seeing the last 2 home games being nationally televised primetime games and having so many no-shows. They had quite a few no-shows against Miami as well. But this is something they've talked about and they've looked at and they've researched for 3 or 4 years now. This isn't something that they suddenly just became concerned about now. I think you look at the improvements that they have made to the stadium in terms of trying to make a better experience. But to your point, it's really expensive. And it's not really expensive to sit at home and watch it on high definition, especially a night game. And let's face it, if you're going to the game and you're staying to the bitter end, and especially if you're partaking in some beverages, there are a lot of people that have to take off a half day of work the following day. I mean, that's not easy. So
or sleepwalk through whatever their job is, right?
Right.
Like we're doing.
Right. I mean, it's just, but it comes down to it, and I know the diehards who were out there until the very end last night are scoffing at what we're saying and saying, "Well, these people are soft, they're a bunch of wimps. They're making excuses." Well, this is just the reality. I mean, you can keep saying that it should be another way. Well, then how do you fix it?
Or it used to be another way, because it used to be another way.
Yeah, I mean, it did, but at the same time, again, that was then, this is now, and we're talking about a society that has a far shorter attention span than it had even 15 or 20 years ago, which 15 or 20 years ago we said the attention span was way shorter then than it was 20 years before that. So I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if there's some magic elixir short of this team needs to get back to a point where they're playing legitimately for having a chance to go to the Super Bowl. You know, it's one thing to talk about having a bad offense and a great defense. Well, the 2000 Ravens went 12-4. You know, this team is, you know, maybe going to go 10-6. You know, that's a different animal. I think that winning goes a long way to curing what ails you. And the Ravens just they haven't been terrible, but they haven't been very good for going on 5 years now. And I think that's, you know, that's one of those that's closer to the top. But then all the other issues beyond the product on the field, those are things that I think people way smarter than me have to try to address as far as this city, you know, politicians, crime, all of that. I think all of those factors are real and factoring in to why we're seeing so many seats. Like you said, not just empty seats, but tickets going unused. I mean, I think that's, you know, there are a lot of people who don't want to go into the city in the middle of the night. And, you know, and let me say this, and this one is very much on the just kind of picking at Monday night's experience. And I know how the Ravens do their pregame introductions, and they've alternated for years. You have your first Monday night home game in over 5 years, and you introduce the starting offense. Really? I mean, that right? And that's speaking as seeing different people on Twitter who were at the game complaining about that. That's something that, you know what, if you hurt Joe Flacco and the offense's feelings, so be it. Introduce your defense. It's one of the best in the NFL, and get your crowd going from that standpoint. I mean, that right there, and I'm nitpicking with that compared to the many much bigger, more pressing issues that we've talked about. But that's one as far as the game day experience. I mean, the people who went out and went out on a Monday night not knowing how cold it was going to be, even though it wasn't that terribly cold on Monday night, you were treated to offensive introductions, which no one gets excited about because this offense is terrible, and then the offense is on the field and goes 3 and out to start the game. So even from a game day experience for the people who were there, right off the bat, you know, the game kind of started with a thud from an enthusiasm standpoint. So that's kind of an aside, but you know, this is very complex, and I think for anyone who's invested in this football team, more specifically invested in this city, it's something you don't like to see. In the same way that the Orioles, who have been pretty good over the last 6 years, you know, this past year, their first losing season since 2011. You know, we've talked about the same issues there with having a winning product on the field and people still not coming out to it. So I don't know. I don't know what the perfect answer is, but you know, like we said, there are a lot of reasons, a lot of variables at work here.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. This portion of our WNST programming brought to you by Lee Tessier and his team at Keller Williams, American Premier Realty. List your home with Lee, and you risk nothing. Go stop by his office up in Abingdon. See him. Check him out online at LeeTessier.com. Wherever your house is in this process, he's going to get it sold for you, and it's never a risk with him. He's going to let you out of that contract if you're unhappy with the service you're getting there, but you won't be. Lee Tessier and his team at Keller Williams, American Premier Realty. Find him at Lee Tessier, that's TESSIER.com, out online. Luke, let's get back onto the field here. The one thing we have not talked about and maybe not have been as effusive in praise, and I know I've talked to you about this a few times, is we really hadn't had to count on Justin Tucker to hit a couple of big field goals to win a game, a close game. There haven't been a lot of games like that this year. They've been sort of blowout-y one way or another, or not really decided like that. This was a game that down the stretch, the special teams played a big role, and then in the end, Anthony Levine, who I am a big fan of, as you know, I think he's a sort of a hilarious character, and more than that, a kid with a lot of grit and determination at the edge of the roster as a smallish guy playing special teams, now out there running around with the defense and making big plays. You know, you could not wipe the smile off his face. I don't know if you were at his locker after the game on Monday night, but and I think he's a guy who's been around a long time as well and been around a lot of Ravens players. I think he's a guy everybody feels good for.
Oh, there's no question about that. And it's funny that you mentioned the special teams, and then you mentioned Anthony Levine, who's been one of their mainstays on special teams. He and Albert McClellan, Chris Moore now the last couple years, they're guys that have lived on special teams. But with Levine, it was interesting talking to Eric Weddle. Eric Weddle was probably the last guy in the locker room on Monday night as he was, getting some ice packs and, just dealing with the routine of a player on the wrong side of 30 playing a football game. You're sore. But he trudged into the locker room, talked to a few of us there, and he's been probably Anthony Levine's biggest advocate as far as, hey, this guy can play on defense. And look, there were some times, 2014 comes to mind, where he got some opportunities. I believe he played corner. I want to say it was against Tennessee or Jacksonville, someone, and had a really nice game. Was someone who had kind of come out of nowhere at that point. Was not a household name to any casual fan. You have to be one of those fans who knows the 53-man roster to have known Anthony Levine at that point. But from the time that Eric Weddle came in 2016, he said right away that Anthony Levine's a guy that can contribute to our defense. And we've seen that. We saw it a little bit last year. We've seen it more so this year where the Ravens have used a lot more dime. And Anthony Levine is someone that can blitz, can drop into coverage, can play safety, can play corner, can play dime linebacker. He's someone who was kind of a Swiss Army knife for your defense, and was pretty cool to see him be able to ice the game. And definitely a good moment for him getting his first interception. But the special teams, and we didn't emphasize this nearly enough in our initial discussions, as we kind of just focused on the defense and then the offense. But how about the fake punt? The pass by Sam Cooke. I mean, at that point, this was not a game that was going very well for the Ravens. They'd given up the touchdown on the opening drive. They hadn't done very much offensively. They had a drive that had bogged down at the Houston 41, and you're thinking, okay, well, they're going to punt again. And Sam Cooke throws a really nice pass to Chris Moore, who makes a nice play on the ball, and 2 plays later, the Ravens are in the end zone. So you look at that. And then Justin Tucker, and you made a good point, Tucker's had a fine season, but he hasn't really been in a position. It's kind of like a baseball player who just hasn't really had a lot of opportunities with runners in scoring position. That's about opportunity. That's not something you can control. I mean, you can be the best hitter in the world, and if you're not coming up with men on base, your opportunities to really make leave your stamp on a ball game are limited. But this was a case where Tucker hits a 53-yarder right before halftime and hits a 49-yarder even late in the game to make it a touchdown lead. If he misses those, and let's face it, I mean, look around the league. There are a lot of kickers who 49-yard field goals, certainly 53-yard field goals, are not high percentage kicks like they are with him. If this is a 4-point game, if this is a 1-point game in the midway through the fourth quarter, this is a very different animal we're talking about as far as how the Texans proceed. Now, the ball was still going to have to be in Tom Savage's hands, and ultimately that was advantage Ravens, as we saw in the final 2 drives of the game. But the special teams were huge in this game. They're often big for the Ravens. We know the Ravens, as much as we talk about the defense, Jerry Rosburg's unit is right up there, if not the best in the NFL, year after year after year. And some of the metric sites and sites that have data for those types of categories, they always say the Ravens are a top 5 special teams unit, at least over the last 6-7 years. We
take that for granted. Speaking of things wrong with the football team, that's something very right with the football team that we don't talk about much. Right?
Yeah. I mean, that's not something that's selling tickets anywhere.
Sure,
but if you want to, it's the difference between your team being 6-5 with one of the worst offenses in the NFL and being 4-7, maybe not 4-7. That might be giving special teams credit for 3 wins. That's probably a bit much, but it's the difference in probably a game or two.
I'll tell you this, having just watched Red Zone all weekend, extra points are not automatic everywhere.
They're not.
Around here they kind of are, but they're not automatic everywhere anymore.
They're really not. It's a different animal now, but the way that the Ravens have had the consistency, not just with their 3 specialists, but just solid coverage from their punt and kickoff teams, and they have hiccups every now and then. I mean, every team does, but that's you need to be good on the margins when you have an offense, when you have a unit, one side of the ball as bad as the Ravens do. You need to be really, really good in the margins. You need to make up the difference. You have a very small margin for error. We say that every single week about this team. And to have special teams, to have Justin Tucker, to have Sam Cook, who isn't just a really good punter, but can throw a pretty good pass to the point where people were clamoring, I hope joking, but clamoring for him to be the quarterback. But it's just, that's something that it's hard to quantify it all the time, but it's been very, very important to their success. And it's a big reason why they've at least given themselves a chance in most seasons, rather than being in a position where you're 6-10, 7-9, not really having a chance getting into week 16, week 17. So the special teams were huge, and really, like I said, that fake punt probably swung the momentum of the game in the favor of the Ravens at that point, because it was not going well up until then.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, and Luke at WNST.net. Short week here. We'll get back after it for the Lions this week. I'm going to be writing about crowd situations and where the fans are in Baltimore and whether we're a good sports town or not. All feedback is always welcomed here. Nasty at WNST.net. There's some threads up there as well. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. Of course, anything you miss, you can find in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device. Just download the TuneIn Radio app. We come in crystal clear. All of it brought to you by buyatoyota.com. Our morning newspaper ships digitally to your email inbox free of charge at 7 a.m. each and every morning. That's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. Last but never least, breaking news. It will happen at some point. The Orioles will do something besides signing, quad A pitchers. We'll break it first. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard, our WNST tech service. And, of course, Dennis will be here on Thursday from 3 until 5, driving you home with the SSV on WNST. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.